This is Rick Rosner, and you're watching the TV Writer Podcast.
Welcome to the TV Writer Podcast, partner of Script Magazine, hosted by Gray Jones. You can follow me on Twitter, @GrayJones is my handle. You can find all of these podcasts online at youtube.com/Graham A. Jones, at scriptmag.com, or on the podcast website at tvwriterpodcast.com, where you can also find lots of other resources like the TV Writer Twitter database, with Twitter handles for over 1,000 writers and links to hundreds of free TV scripts. Now, on to the episode.
This is Gray, and I'm here with TV writer and purportedly second highest IQ of the world possessor, Rick Rosner. I'm messing that up, but how are you doing, Rick?
Hey, okay.
Cool. Well, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast because I think you have a really fascinating story. And I think one of the reasons that it's fascinating is because I think a lot of people who want to get into writing might be coming from something else, and they might be coming from an area where they might be told by people this is what you should do, and I know from coming from a math background myself that just because I was good at math didn't necessarily mean that that was what I wanted to do with my life.
I kind of didn't want to do math science because I eventually wanted to get a girlfriend. And people don't know now. Now it's okay to be nerdy. Back in the 70s, it was a little brutal.
Mm-hmm. Well, why don't we talk about that? Because I think it really does inform sort of the trajectory of your life and inform where you ended up. So tell me about, you grew up in Boulder, Colorado.
Yeah.
And so when did you know that you were this sort of high IQ person or nerdy person?
I started reading really early. First of all, in the 60s, I was born in 1960, there were no helicopter parents. The word parenting barely existed. And people did not tend to nurture any kind of, or search for any kind of giftedness in their kids. So when it showed up, it terrified my mom. I started reading, at 3, and in kindergarten, they gave us an IQ test, and the teacher called my mom and my stepdad in and told them I was a genius, and this made them really nervous, and they tried to raise me as a normal kid, and that didn't work because I was nerdy.
Mm-hmm. And so you started to branch out into some other activities. I think quite fascinating, you got into bodybuilding pretty early. And tell me about some of the other things that you did that you wouldn't necessarily expect from somebody with a high IQ.
The deal is that every nerd thinks that his innate gifts or kindness or gentleness or whatever will overcome the social handicap of being nerdy, and he'll end up getting the girl that he wants, mm-hmm. which is how it works in a lot of movies. It took me till close to the end of high school to realize it doesn't really work that way, and that I would have to make some have to learn how to, acquire some of the stuff you need to get a girlfriend, because I really wanted one.
Yeah.
I think the 70s were a very sexual and sexually desperate time. I think because everything else sucked. Sex was one of the few things that was good. The food was bad, the TV was largely bad, there were no video games or, CG movies. People were still, skinny, so sex was a big deal. Mm. Now I think it's less so. But for me, I wanted to lose my virginity. And so I started lifting weights. I started talking like Barbarino from Welcome Back, Kotter. None of this worked particularly well because Boulder wasn't a big town, and everybody knew that I was a nerd trying not to be a nerd.
Mm-hmm. And so you went to college at the University of Colorado Boulder?
Well, first I went back to high school. Mm-hmm. I freaked out about college and was like, how am I gonna get a girlfriend in college if I can't even get one at my stupid little high school? Mm-hmm. So I broke into my high school, I stole blank records, I went back to high school to try to have a second senior year with my other family, my dad and my stepmom in Albuquerque. I only lasted, I don't know, about 10 weeks. That didn't work well either. So, and then I went to college.
And then you went to college. And now you've been married for 20 some odd years. So
Almost 25 years.
Almost 25. So did you meet your wife at college?
I did, yeah. University of Colorado, which is my hometown school, which means that I didn't take it seriously.
Yeah. And so now, connect me to New York, because in around '87 you started writing for MTV.
All right, so I have a theory of the universe, and I started working on it when I was about 21, and I just wanted a quiet place to sit and think about, how the theory might work. So I decided to go back to high school one last time. I was 26. I wasn't there to hit on girls or anything. I was just there to be stuck in one of those little desk chair combinations. Einstein had the Swiss patent office where he stood and thought about stuff. I thought I'd sit in high school and think about stuff. So I went to high school in Albuquerque for summer school, and then the fall semester, and I got bored there. A girl I'd been dating during her last semester at the University of Colorado had, after graduation, moved to New York, and I asked if I could move out there to finish my last year of high school. So she became my fake legal guardian, and I graduated from high school for the last time at 27.
Wow.
And then I was a high school student by day, and then I was a nude art model and stripper and bouncer by night. And I was hitting all the colleges in Manhattan looking for work as modeling for art classes. You don't have to be you just have to be willing to get naked. It's not like being a model. But at Fordham University, they had a flyer up saying they needed 18-year-olds to come try out for an MTV game show in development. And I liked being 18, but I couldn't be 18 anymore because I'd graduated high school. But this was one more chance to be 18, so I went and I tried out.
Yeah.
And they liked how dumb I was because I acted like I thought, an MTV kid would act. They had me back to do another run through of the game for the execs. And I'd never been around a bunch of smart, funny people before, and it was really fun and exciting. And I asked, can I work for you guys? And I'm not really 18, and you don't have to pay me. And Viacom runs on interns, MTV. So I forged some documents that said I was getting college credit, and I went to work for the show, which turned out to be Remote Control.
And so from there, you started a pretty long string you did a lot of clip shows and things like funniest shows and writing for behind the scenes of a lot of comedy stuff. Tell me about that, how that happened.
I met the guy who would eventually be my writing partner on Remote Control, and New York was kind of gross in the mid-'80s, late 80s. So my wife wanted to move home to LA, so we came out here. I had a bunch of years of unemployment or semi-employment, just bouncing and being naked. Then hooked up with who'd become my writing partner. We kind of accidentally got an agent at William Morris and started working on The World's Funniest, which was Fox's version of America's Funniest Home Videos. And you're just writing jokes to clips.
Yeah.
During other times, I wrote for quite a few game shows. Eventually, we worked with Jimmy Kimmel and ended up working on his shows for a long time.
And tell me about through this, you've been taking IQ tests, and you learned that you had a very high IQ, and also you got involved sort of in the genius community, if I can say it that way.
All right, so the whole thing is like embarrassingly nerdy, but it's hard for me to stay away from the same way that if you're really good at something, you want to keep doing it. In high school, I thought I was really smart, and then I requested to see my permanent record, and it had all my IQ scores in it, and they were lower than I thought. None of them were over 151. So I'm like, that's not very smart at all. I'm going to have to learn how to live as a regular person. At that point, I became a bouncer and a stripper and a naked guy. Then I started taking these, then I found out that I started taking IQ tests designed for supposedly designed for people with super high IQs. Then I started scoring in the 170s and 180s. I found out that I'd never gotten higher than about 150 in school because the tests only go up that high in school, which makes sense. It doesn't, in terms of what the school is going to do with a kid, there's really not much difference between the kid scoring 140 and a kid scoring 165. A decent school will still get that kid additional resources. IQ was originally designed not to be, have three digits of precision. It was the guy Binet in France wanted it to have a scale of 1 to 5, with 3 being average. If a kid scores a 1 or a 2, that kid needs a certain kind of help. A kid who gets a 4 or a 5 is going to need some other kind of help. And then, Terman and some other people in America turned it into this 100-point ratio scale that makes it seem a lot more precise than it actually is. But it was really designed to figure out what educational resources should be given to each kid.
And I've heard it said that people with high IQ anyway, no two tests will be able to accurately test that person's IQ. And I know that there is a lot of experience involved too. Like if somebody has spent a lot of time with the kinds of questions that come up in these tests, they're going to do better than somebody who hasn't been.
I've taken dozens and dozens of IQ tests. So there's a practice effect. And IQ, the whole idea of IQ is a little wobbly, where you're trying to, measure intelligence on a linear scale, whereas intelligence has lots of different aspects. And persistence and other qualities when taking some of these super high-end tests, which can take 100 or 200 hours to really do a good job on, other factors come in, which is knowing what it takes to do well on the tests and having the persistence or having the desperation to have something going for you.
So circling back, how does that inform your TV writing, your joke writing in particular? Do you find that you call on, is it a quick wit that you call on?
My wit's not that quick. Some of the people I've worked with are super fast. I'm slower. One of the shows I worked on involved prank calls, and you need to be super fast to write a prank on the phone, and that's not my area of expertise. My strengths are pulling a lot of information in from different areas and coming up with analogies that are kind of jokey. Jokes are a way of presenting information, and I'm good at digging up information.
And tell me about, you've written a lot of pilots. A lot of them ended up being unaired, but you worked on a lot of pilots in the 90s, some apparently with Jimmy Kimmel. Tell me about that sort of aspect of your TV writing.
I haven't done a pilot in a long time, but I don't know, I've worked on 8 or 10 or 12, and most pilots don't go. Some pilots aren't even complete pilots. They're kind of pilot run-throughs where, like for a game show, a company might give you $5,000 to put on something that's like a high school play. You find an auditorium with a stage. You promise everybody that you can't pay them anything now, but if it goes to series, then you'll pay them a lot. And it's just a rinky-dink little production. In the 90s, we did a show, a run-through pilot for $5,000 called Get a Job, where for FX, if you won, you got a 3-month job at the place of your dreams. They focus grouped it, and the focus group said that getting a job was way too serious a subject to be presented in a game show format.
No.
And then, now every show, now there are dozens of shows that hook you up if you win the show.
And so tell me about then writing with Jimmy Kimmel, because that since 2000, you've done quite a bit.
I worked on his shows for a long time. I wrote a lot of stuff. Some of it, in one form or another, made it onto TV.
And tell me, say for instance, about obviously in general terms, but just when you're writing in that context, some of the things that somebody might need to know if they wanted to write in that sort of sphere.
Thing one is you need to be lucky, because in the entire history of late night TV, depending on what you call a late night show, leaving out like SNL and maybe Colbert, the Comedy Central version of Colbert and Stewart, just the straight late night shows like Johnny Carson, into Conan and Leno and the Jimmys. There have only been 400 or 500 writers in all of history who've worked on these shows.
Wow.
So you need to be lucky to end up on one of those things. Thing two might be that jokes and the people writing jokes, I would guess, are smarter than ever. Because, say, 100 years ago, you live on a farm and go into town, either to school or to do your business, is the most interesting part of your week. You go to town and you maybe trade 3 or 4 jokes. And so over the course of a year, maybe you've heard 200 jokes. Now, if you go on Twitter and you follow, enough people, you can read 200 jokes in 90 minutes. Everybody's heard every joke ever. Everybody's been exposed to. It's one reason why TV is having, according to a lot of people, and I agree with those people, a golden age where TV is really good, because everybody's seen every plot ever, every joke ever. And so good TV has to rise above the junk that everybody is already completely familiar with. If you watched like a Tonight Show monologue from the 70s, I think people would be surprised at how simple and easy the jokes are. Somebody's fat, Elizabeth Taylor. Somebody's everything was pretty straightforward. Leno was known for telling kind of straightforward, easy jokes, but I think I would guess that a lot of Johnny Carson's jokes were super, super straightforward. And jokes now are less so because people are more sophisticated, because they have a greater knowledge base. There's a thing called the Flynn effect, which is that the IQs of the entire planet, the average IQ of humans everywhere, has gone up 15 or more points since World War II.
Really?
Yeah. And Flynn, the guy who discovered this, said, well, it's not that our grandparents were really stupid, it's that pop culture has pervaded the world to such an extent that everybody has learned sophisticated habits of thought, which means that our entertainment needs to be more sophisticated.
That is fascinating, and fascinating applications for somebody who wants to break into this. Do your homework.
Well, and I wrote a little web article with 30 points on breaking in. I'll see if I can remember some of those. One is, have no pride. Don't fight for your words. The first Writers Guild job my partner and I ever got, they called us in and they said, you guys are here and the previous writers aren't because they fought for their words too much. TV's highly collaborative, and good TV is highly selective. And if you're working on a late night show, most of the stuff you write is not going to make air. You just have to do the math. If a host gets presented with 200 jokes from his staff on an average day, and some hosts get more than that, each host has kind of a standard number of jokes that can fit in the opening talk. But nobody, even Leno probably spit out the most jokes in his monologue, but even he, didn't go much over 30 jokes. And he was, I would guess, I have no, actual information about it, but he had a big staff. If everybody's turning in 20 jokes, which is not unreasonable. Some people turn in way more than that. He's going to get hundreds of jokes, out of which, he might choose a couple dozen. He's going to come up with some himself, probably. So, you're looking at a super high rate of jokes not making air. But you need all the jokes you need the big batch of jokes it's like virtual particles. We live in a sea of particles that only momentarily or don't really exist, but that sea of virtual particles in the world supports the real particles, the particles that rise out of the sea of virtuality and get to exist for a while. And you need that same sea of jokes for the good jokes to rise out of.
Yeah.
But anyway, don't freak out when your stuff doesn't get used. There are a bunch of, you want to get your stuff out there one way or the other now. So you want to put stuff on YouTube, you want to do stand-up. I just saw the LinkedIn page of the head writer of The Tonight Show. And he said, don't contacting me asking how to break in. He said, go to New York or LA and start doing stand-up. That's how you do it. It's not how I did it, but you do, with all the ways you can get your stuff out there now, Twitter, YouTube, still stand-up, you need to be getting your stuff out there. Somebody may see it. Even if they don't, you need to do the comedy push-ups to build up an arsenal of ways you can come up with jokes. If you can afford it, be an intern. I started off as an intern. And you're giving, the intern thing took a big hit when people started suing entertainment companies because the companies were allegedly abusing the system. Having people work full-time jobs, doing actual jobs like accounting, but not paying them and calling them interns. So eventually some people sued over this.
Yeah.
Which meant that some companies quit using interns. They switched entirely to PAs, and fewer of those because PAs get paid. At the same time, you can go out and there are hundreds of production entities in LA and probably pushing 100 in New York, and If you contact a bunch of them and say, hey, I want to work for you for free, and I'll do anything, some of them will be like, okay, that sounds good. And if you're competent and cheerful and hardworking, you will stand out from the other interns, because the average intern isn't so much that way. Because there's no entrance exam for entertainment, for TV or movies. And a lot of people drift into it because it seems easy and fun, and because they're hoping to become a star. And the same people who have that kind of hopeful thinking often aren't the best workers. So if you're an intern and you're a great worker, you'll stand out.
Yeah.
And you'll move up. It may take a while. The entire entertainment industry is a scam, where everybody at the lower levels works under horrible conditions for generally not great pay, hoping to move up to be one of the few people at the top of the pyramid. So I forget what my point was going to be, except that, put in your time at the bottom of the pyramid, and if you're competent and not a douche, you'll likely slowly move up.
Yeah. What are sort of where you're looking towards for the future? What do you see yourself doing in the future?
I've got a book I'm trying to get a deal for about the 10 years I spent in high school.
Yeah.
High school student by day, highest IQ in America, stripper by night, bouncer by night, naked guy by afternoons and night. And it's a ridiculous story, and it's fun, and I'm just trying to get internet famous enough that somebody will give me a deal. I don't want to self-publish it. That seems like a swamp of selling 8 copies of a book. And you're in there. I mean, the self-published, like legitimately published books, or not legitimate, but books published by big publishers, there's still a lot of junk there. But then you go into the self-publishing realm, and where the authors themselves are often setting the bar. And if you self-publish, it seems really hard to become the real particle that rises above the virtual stuff that sells 4, 5, 12 copies.
Yeah, and then you don't have the promotional weight behind it.
Right.
Of the publishing company.
Yeah.
So you said that you had some other tips, and
Yep.
we've taken a break so you can grab them, and here we go.
Yeah. Don't stop after your first or second idea. People who aren't in the habit of coming up with ideas think that the first thing they come up with is fine. It's generally not your best. You want to come up with a dozen ideas and then pick the best of those ideas. And you want to get in the habit of coming up with ideas so it doesn't take forever to come up with those dozen ideas. Be healthy. Especially if you look on Twitter, you might think that comedy writers are drunk slobs, but that's just for comedy purposes. People are generally pretty healthy.
Yeah.
In the 70s, comedy writers had the reputation based on maybe SNL of just being coked up and super druggy but the comedy offices I've been in, there's fiber gummies so people don't get, they can stopped up sitting at work all day. There's exercise equipment. You want to get adequate sleep. You can party some, but LA is like LA, which is more of an entertainment town than New York now. The bars close at 2. And most bars empty out, earlier than that, because people have stuff to do the next day. If you're wanting to write comedy, you might want to join an improv group, which really helps you come up with ideas more productively. Though you don't want to make your friends come to your improv shows. Nobody wants to see those. What else? I said you could try to get jobs on game shows, but that's an old school kind of. Game show writing is, less dignified and less than other forms of TV writing. Mm-hmm. But that's really under the umbrella of get your stuff out there.
Right.
So you don't have to look for game show jobs anymore. You can put your stuff on YouTube or wherever else is the current place to put your stuff on the internet. Mm-hmm. But just get your stuff out there, which means you should be working on your stuff. If you're going to write late night, you want to know the news. You kind of want to know who's who in the world of punchlines. If you aspire to work on a late night show, know that show, watch that show. Some people don't know the show they're trying to get on well enough. Mm-hmm. You need to watch it, you need to like it. It shouldn't be an exercise in just doing homework. You should really appreciate what the show is doing. And if it's a late night show, know the shows on that network. That show may refer to those shows sometimes. What else? Use your life. I'm pretty eccentric, so if I can't get a laugh with my jokes, I can sometimes get a laugh with the stupid stuff that's going on with me personally. Mm-hmm. And so build your humor from your life. Comedy Twitter is generally people commenting on dumb stuff going on in their own lives. Mm-hmm. And along with using your own life, develop a point of view. I've been trying to build a point of view. I think it's scary and funny how the future is going to kick our asses. Mm-hmm. How we suck up every new device that comes along, but all our devices, all our tech are the seeds of the destruction of traditional humanity. Mm-hmm. 30 years from now, we're going to be all Borged out. Not just cops will be wearing body cams. Everybody will be wearing personal recorders because people will want to hold on to and share their lives with other people. Zuckerberg says he wants Facebook to eventually be telepathic, which means instead of people sending each other cat pictures and sunsets, people will send those along with how it made them feel to see that sunset or to eat that casserole or whatever. The feelings will, this is 50 years from now, I don't know, but eventually people will, send feelings to each other mm-hmm. via whatever the social media of the time is. And humanity will change into this weird, I like thinking that the percent weirdness is equal to the last 2 digits of the year we're living in. Mm-hmm. So we're in 2015 and life is about 15% weird mm-hmm. compared to the 20th century where everybody is married to their devices. 2025, life will be 25% weird. By 2090, 2095, life is going to be just... Old politicians like to talk about the world we're leaving to our grandchildren. Yeah. Well, our grandchildren are going to be completely weird to us. And the world will be completely weird. I've been trying to figure out where the humor might be in the future kicking our asses.
Mm-hmm. And how much of that is generational, though? I mean, if you're writing for comedy, you have to be able to relate to the generation that's coming in as well. As part of the weirdness that we're living in, where we're just like drowning in information, mm-hmm. there's not the generation gap they talked about in the 60s, where adults have a completely different set of references and behaviors than people in their teens and 20s. Mm-hmm. And everybody knows who Justin Bieber is. Yeah.
Everybody knows everything about everybody that, are all the people who are in the tabloids. So it's not exactly a generational thing. Mm-hmm. One more thing is to learn how to pitch, learn how to talk to people. You can learn, by doing stand-up. You can learn by coming up with, show ideas. And if you can get representation that'll get you into doors, then take meetings, pitch shows. Though, do not expect to sell a show from pitching. I talked to a producer guy at the gym, and I go, and this is a guy who's sold quite a few shows. I go, what is the ratio of pitch meetings to shows sold? He said 200.
200 shows sold for every one that's out of
200.
a pitch?
You take 200 meetings before you actually sell a show.
Oh, I see.
My wife and I have a show we've been pitching around, and we've pitched at 3 places. My wife gets excited.
Yeah.
Ooh, they're going to listen to our idea, and I'm like, you can't get excited.
Yeah. Yeah, very cool. So as we start to wrap up here, how can people find out more about your work? How can people, Ed, you said you're on Twitter?
Yeah, see me at Twitter at dumbassgenius. Just Google Rick Rosner, and you'll see a lot of the stupid stuff I've done. Mm-hmm. And scathing, the best part of stories about me on the internet are the horrible scathing comments following the stories.
Yeah.
So there's lots of that.
Yeah, great. Well, I do appreciate you taking the time here to speak with us and share those awesome tips and also about your fascinating life. And I do wish you the best, and especially with that book we'll be watching to see.
The book is also called Dumbass Genius.
So we will be watching for that soon-ish, we hope.
I need to get a deal. A publisher needs to think it's a good deal, which it is.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Rick, and best of luck to you.
Thank you.
I want to thank this week's sponsors, Red Giant Software at redgiant.com.
Scrivener, outlining and storyboarding software at literatureandlatte.com. And Blackmagic Design, makers of DaVinci Resolve 12 edit software, and much more at blackmagicdesign.com. If you've got kids 8 and under, they're going to love the fun animated songs at abc123songs.com.
I want to remind you that you can follow me on Twitter at GrayJones is my handle for the latest updates. And as always, there are tons of resources at tvwriterpodcast.com. You can find all of these podcasts on YouTube at youtube.com/Graham A. Jones. See you next time.